Welcome to this historical explainer. Okay, today we're taking a journey back in time to explore a place that honestly just defies imagination. We're going to unpack the story of a location that stood as the literal crown jewel of empires. It was this vibrant epicenter where East collided with West, and a fortress that commanded the respect and, let's be real, the absolute envy of every single ruler on the planet. Get ready, because the sheer scale of what we're about to discuss is absolutely awe-inspiring.
So, I want you to ask yourself, what city changed human history forever? We're talking about a mythic metropolis that served as the unrivaled center of the entire world for millennia. A place so unfathomably wealthy and powerful that countless armies just threw themselves at its gates, only to be completely broken and turned away. Now, before I actually give away its most famous name, let's look at exactly why this particular spot on the globe was destined for unparalleled greatness.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Before it was defined by towering stone walls, majestic domes, or its legendary emperors, this city's supreme power stemmed from what we can honestly only describe as a geographical cheat code. I mean it. It was built right on the shores of the Bosphorus, perfectly positioned as a triangular peninsula that acted as the vital, beating bridge between Europe and Asia. Basically, whoever controlled this exact point on the map, well, they controlled the world.
Let's take a closer look at the Bosphorus itself. This is an ancient term that actually translates beautifully to the passage of the bull. It's a critical, totally narrow strait of water measuring only about 1 or 1.5 miles wide. But seriously, don't let its size fool you. This waterway links the Sea of Marmara to the Black Sea, which basically meant that every single merchant ship, every global trade route, and every military fleet moving between these massive regions had to pass right under the watchful eyes of this city. It was the absolute, unavoidable toll booth of the ancient world.
And branching right off the Bosphorus is the second half of this geographic masterpiece, the Golden Horn. This brilliantly illustrates how perfect the geography was. It's an exceptionally calm, highly secure natural harbor stretching roughly 2 miles long and about half a mile wide. The Golden Horn provided this incredibly safe anchorage for literally thousands of ships, keeping them completely protected from both turbulent seas and enemy fleets. It effectively turned the city into an unrivaled powerhouse of commerce and naval supremacy.
Now, because of this unmatched geography, it probably won't surprise you that the city has ancient roots bathed in constant conflict. It was originally founded way back in 656 BC by a leader named Byzas who came from the region of Megara. But hey, a location this good doesn't stay quiet for long, right? It fell to the Persian king Darius in 485 BC before eventually being violently integrated into the Roman world by Emperor Septimius Severus around 193 AD. And all of that, it just set the stage for an explosive transformation in 330 AD.
For centuries, you see, this strategic masterpiece was known as Ancient Byzantium. And man, it was the definitive prize. It was violently fought over by the Spartans who seized it, the Athenians who fiercely contested it, the Macedonians, and eventually, of course, the mighty Romans. Everyone wanted a piece of Byzantium because everyone realized that holding this city meant holding the absolute keys to the entire region's wealth and power.
But the entire trajectory of human history shifted on a dime in the monumental year 330 AD. That's the year the great Roman Emperor Constantine the Great looked at the map, looked at the, frankly, crumbling center of his current empire, and set his sights firmly on Byzantium. He realized that the future of his empire didn't actually lie in the West anymore, but right here, at the literal crossroads of the world.
Now, what's really interesting about this next move is the intentionality behind the number 7. When Constantine initiated the massive rebuilding and expansion of the city, he didn't just build it willy-nilly. He explicitly chose to construct it across 7 distinct hills. This was a highly calculated move designed specifically to mirror the 7 hills of Rome. He was sending a loud, completely undeniable message to the world. This wasn't just some new city. This was the new Rome.
So in 330 AD, Emperor Constantine quite literally renamed the whole city after himself, Constantinople. He officially turned it into the beating heart and capital of the Roman Empire. Constantinople became the definitive world capital, perfectly bridging the gap between East and West. It rapidly morphed into a super city that dwarfed the old city of Rome in its building majesty, its booming population, and its totally unimaginable wealth.
To truly understand the kind of wealth and cultural dominance this new world capital had, you really just have to look at its architectural majesty. Nothing anchors the narrative of Constantinople's glory quite like the Hagia Sophia. This wasn't just a building. It was the supreme, ultimate symbol of the empire's limitless resources and divine favor. It stood high above the skyline, visible to every single ship entering the Golden Horn,
projecting an aura of undeniable power.
And the sheer scale of this project? It's staggering. Building a wonder of this magnitude was a genuinely unbelievable feat. Ordered by Emperor Justinian and completed in 538 AD, the Hagia Sophia required an astonishing 10,000 workers, all toiling under the direction of 100 brilliant architects. Just picture that. Spanning roughly 270 feet in length and 240 feet in width, the absolute sheer volume of stone, marble, and gold poured into what was widely considered the greatest church in the world it's mind-blowing.
Let's see how this builds the next chapter of our story, though. Because you simply cannot amass that level of internal beauty and unimaginable wealth without attracting the envy of the entire known world. Constantinople was this glowing beacon of riches, which meant facing a very harsh reality. It required unprecedented, almost paranoid levels of protection. All that beauty inside had to be matched by some serious, formidable brawn on the outside.
So how exactly do you protect the richest city on Earth from a constant, endless wave of barbarian and imperial invaders? Well, you build the most massive, legendary defensive walls humanly possible. Constantinople was completely surrounded by hostile forces, from northern tribes to eastern empires, so the Romans had to engineer a way to defend the seemingly indefensible. They had to turn a bustling trade hub into a completely impenetrable military stronghold. And these weren't just your simple, run-of-the-mill barricades. The fortifications of Constantinople were an evolving masterpiece of military engineering. Originally laid down in part by ancient Greek kings, they were continually reinforced, thickened, and heavily rebuilt by successive Roman rulers. They completely enclosed the city in this incredibly intimidating blanket of stone. Featuring around 20 massive square towers and up to 47 heavily fortified gates, these walls were literally designed to break the spirit of any attacking army before they even notched an arrow.
Amazingly, it wasn't just human armies that tried to bring this city down. The earth itself tried to shake it to pieces. Despite suffering from incredibly devastating earthquakes, especially a couple of big ones in 413 AD and 557 AD that actually caused sections of the walls to collapse, the defenders always rapidly rebuilt them even stronger than before. Through nature's absolute wrath and relentless sieges from Persians, Avars, Arabs, and Bulgars, the city defiantly stood its ground, every single time.
So, the crucial point here is that for over a millennium, the genius combination of its Bosphorus geography, the safety of the Golden Horn, and these colossal, heavily fortified walls made this imperial capital completely unassailable. It was the definitive psychological and physical fortress. Armies would march for months to its gates, gaze up at the sheer, dizzying scale of those stone defenses, and basically realize that getting inside was a virtual impossibility.
But that leaves us with a truly dramatic cliffhanger. If Constantinople possessed the greatest geographic cheat code on the planet and was protected by walls that withstood 1,000 years of the most brutal sieges in human history, how did it eventually fall? How were these legendary, supposedly impenetrable walls finally breached, changing the map of the entire world forever? Well, that is exactly the suspenseful question we are going to answer in our next explainer. You absolutely will not want to miss it.
Picture this. It's the morning of May 29th, 1453, and the air is just thick with smoke, dust, and the shouts of thousands of men. Suddenly, a deafening roar of artillery completely shatters the morning silence. For literally over 1,000 years, the massive towering walls of Constantinople were the ultimate shield of the ancient world. I mean, they were the absolute gold standard for an impenetrable defense. But on this single, incredibly explosive day, the unthinkable happened. The ancient world's strongest walls finally gave way.
It really makes you stop and wonder, right? How exactly does an ultimate fortress, one that stood totally invincible for centuries and defied empire after empire, suddenly get reduced to rubble in a single decisive moment? This wasn't just some run-of-the-mill battle. This was a spectacular, catastrophic breach that permanently shifted the global map. So, let's dive right into this explainer and uncover the dramatic military strategies that brought down an empire.
Section 1. The unbreakable ancient walls. To really wrap our heads around the magnitude of this collapse, we first have to understand the awe-inspiring scale of these defenses. Just like Rome, the ancient city of Constantinople, which was established way back around 330 AD, was built upon 7 distinct hills. This wasn't just some flat city hiding behind a basic wall. Oh no, it was a towering, multi-layered geographic fortress. Any approaching army was forced to stare up at this incredibly intimidating, heavily fortified high ground that practically dared them to try and attack. And geography gave them the ultimate home field advantage. The city sat perfectly at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, flanked by the highly strategic waterways of the Bosphorus Strait and the Golden Horn Inlet. This naturally created a lethal choke point. Any approaching navy was forced into these really tight, highly defensive waters where the city's defenders had the absolute upper hand. Actually, they would often block off the Golden Horn entirely with this massive floating iron chain. You really couldn't get past it.
Section 2. Centuries of failed sieges. Thanks to that brilliant combination of high walls and water choke points, the city survived wave after wave of invaders for centuries. We're talking Arab forces launching massive sieges starting around 671 AD. Then the Bulgars brought their armies in 755 AD. The fierce Normans traveled from afar to try their luck in 866. And again, the walls held. The attackers were met with absolutely devastating counterattacks, sometimes involving these terrifying, unquenchable naval weapons like Greek fire, and they were either completely repelled or they perished. Get a load of this statistic. Throughout its long history, leading up to 1453, the city was besieged a staggering 29 times, but it was only conquered 7 times, and almost never by brute force from an outside power looking to dismantle the empire. Before 1453, the idea of a permanent, catastrophic military breach of those walls, it was considered practically impossible, a complete fantasy. Section 3. A young sultan's vision. But, the world outside those walls was evolving rapidly. This whole situation became this fascinating clash of eras. On one hand, you had the declining remnants of the ancient Roman Empire. It had become kind of static, aging, and heavily reliant on the past glory of its walls. On the other hand, you had the rising Ottoman military machine, fueled by the relentless ambition of a young Sultan Mehmed II. The Ottomans were bringing a highly organized, dynamic, and modern kinetic offense to the table, and the ancient world simply did not have an answer for it. Section 4. The Janissary military machine. To really grasp why the Ottomans succeeded where literally everyone else failed, we have to look at their legendary elite infantry, the Janissaries. The name literally translates to the new army, and they were established decades earlier, back in 1362, by Sultan Murad I. They were designed to serve directly under the Sultan as his personal guard. In an era where most European armies just relied on temporary, scattered feudal levies, the Janissaries were a highly specialized corps. Basically, they were one of Europe's first modern standing armies, created from the ground up to be the ultimate weapon. So, how do you build a force that incredibly effective? Well, first, they were recruited in their youth, completely removing them from their past lives to ensure absolute, undivided loyalty to the Sultan. Second, they went through this rigorous, continuous training in strict military discipline, combat mastery, and faith. They were raised to know absolutely nothing but warfare, which forged this incredibly tight psychological brotherhood. The result? A totally unstoppable force on the battlefield. They were widely considered the absolute most feared and skilled warriors of their era. Section 5. 1453. The Spectacular Breach. Which brings us squarely back to the spring of 1453. This is where the immovable object finally met the unstoppable force. This breach wasn't just a stroke of luck. It was an absolute masterclass in overwhelming strategy and ingenuity. First, Sultan Mehmed II brought in massive, newly developed super cannons. We're talking cannons so large that one of them literally required hundreds of oxen just to move it. They fired these impossibly heavy projectiles that physically battered the ancient stone day and night. The sheer roar and kinetic power shattered the illusion of the city's invincibility. Second, the Ottomans executed these brilliant naval maneuvers. In a stroke of absolute tactical genius, they actually rolled their ships over land on greased logs to completely bypass that massive iron chain blocking the Golden Horn. Crazy, right? This allowed them to attack directly from the water. And finally, relentless, perfectly coordinated ground assaults led by those elite Janissaries simply overwhelmed the exhausted defenders. The end of a great ancient empire and the founding of a new one. When the dust finally settled on May 29th, the outcome literally changed human history. The breach marked the definitive end of a great ancient empire that had lasted for over 1,000 years, and the triumphant founding of a new one under the Sultan. In a single moment, the geopolitical map of the world was instantly and permanently redrawn. Section 6. Secrets in the Rubble. Now, our story doesn't just end with military destruction, because while the mighty defenses fell, true magnificence actually survived. Take the legendary Hagia Sophia.
rebuilt centuries earlier by the Emperor Justinian, using over 10,000 workers and featuring a staggering 170 columns of beautiful marble, it somehow survived this brutal siege. Instead of being destroyed, it was preserved, revered, and transformed to serve a brand new era. It stood tall, right there amidst the ashes of the old empire. Which leaves us with a truly compelling mystery to ponder. We know the greatest walls of the ancient world were shattered by supercannons. We know the Hagia Sophia survived the spectacular transition of 1453. But what other hidden architectural secrets, underground networks, and legendary monuments were left behind in the ashes of this conquered city? What else survived the siege? Well, that is exactly what we're going to explore in our next explainer. You absolutely won't want to miss it.
All right, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're taking a fascinating journey straight into the heart of the ultimate fortress city, Constantinople. We're looking at a place where geography, history, and just pure, unchecked human ambition collided to create something truly indestructible. This was a metropolis that stood as the absolute envy of the world, guarding its secrets behind these seemingly impossible layers of defense. Imagine a structure so wildly ambitious in its design that it actually survived the wrath of nature and the relentless conquests of man. We are talking about an architectural wonder that literally defied time, shrugged off devastating earthquakes like they were nothing, and completely outlasted the rise and fall of absolute empires. So how on earth did a single city protect a treasure like that for centuries? Well, the answer is an absolute masterclass in defensive engineering.
Just look at the sheer majesty of the Hagia Sophia dominating the skyline here. It's breathtaking, right? But to really grasp how this spiritual and architectural core survived the ages, we can't just stare at the building itself. We've got to zoom out. We need to look at the massive concentric rings of defense layered all around it, starting from the very edges of the water and moving inward.
Which brings us to Ring 1, the ultimate natural fortress. Before invaders even saw a single brick or stone, they faced a geographical nightmare. Take the Bosphorus Strait, for instance. This isn't just a river, it's a massive, turbulent channel stretching 20 miles long and 1.5 miles wide, aggressively splitting the continents of Europe and Asia. Any invading army had to figure out how to cross this treacherous waterway just to get close to the city limits. It was an incredibly intimidating first hurdle. And branching right off of that strait is the Golden Horn. Think of it as a naturally perfect horn-shaped inlet, stretching roughly 2 miles long and 0.5 mile wide. It essentially acted as an impenetrable natural moat and, honestly, arguably the world's finest harbor. It allowed the city's fleets to dock in absolute safety while totally cutting off enemy ships. Between the roaring Bosphorus and the Golden Horn, the city was practically guarded by the planet itself. Now, if an army somehow survived those swirling waters, they hit Ring 2. Walls that defied empires. And the crucial point here is the sheer, imposing scale of what they faced. The city was locked behind unbelievably high, thick walls, heavily reinforced by around 20 massive, square stone towers. And these definitely weren't just lookouts. They were heavily armed bastions designed to rain absolute destruction down on anyone foolish enough to approach. Plus, these defenses evolved over time. Originally, the ancient city was actually pretty modest, boasting a mere 7 gates. But as the empire's wealth and enemies multiplied, the fortress expanded. It transformed into this sprawling, terrifying obstacle course, featuring up to 37 heavily fortified gates. Every single entrance was a total death trap for attackers, sealing the citizens in perfect safety. With that invincible shell secured, the empire could focus its wealth on its ultimate jewel, which is Ring 3, rebuilding an architectural wonder. Now, the Hagia Sophia we see today actually wasn't the first attempt. Its early life was incredibly chaotic. First constructed back in 325 AD by Constantine the Great, it was later completely decimated by a massive earthquake in the 500s. But that total natural devastation, it really just set the stage for its legendary resurrection. Between 531 and 538 AD, the Emperor Justinian initiated an epic 7-year rebuild, absolutely determined to create something that would defy the earth itself. To pull this off, Justinian summoned a truly superhuman effort. We're talking exactly 100 elite master architects commanding a tireless, highly skilled army of 10,000 workers. Day and night, this incredible workforce labored for 7 straight years to manifest an architectural dream that had literally never been attempted in human history.
And the numbers they produced are staggering, even today. The Great Dome measured 270 feet in length, 243 feet in width, and soared 180 feet up into the sky. To put that into perspective, they created an interior space so impossibly vast that it feels like stepping into an artificial universe. It easily became the most magnificent building of its era.
So, how did it stay up? Let's step inside for Ring 4, Secrets of the Great Dome.
Take a look at this colossal dome. To make sure it wouldn't just collapse on itself, the ancient engineers utilized a brilliantly ingenious trick. They wedged blocks of precious green jasper stone tightly beneath the great arches. This rare, resilient stone basically acted as an ancient shock absorber, ensuring the whole structure remained perfectly balanced and flexible enough to ride out the violent tremors of future earthquakes.
But they didn't stop there. Supporting all of that overwhelming weight required way more than just clever geometry. The entire internal structure is held aloft by an unbelievable 170 magnificent, towering columns made of extremely rare porphyry and marble. And here is a truly mind-blowing fact about those 170 columns. They were not quarried fresh for this building. Nope, they were actually scavenged from the greatest pagan temples of the ancient world. The builders hauled massive pillars all the way from the Temple of the Sun in Egypt, the legendary Temple of Diana in Ephesus, and ancient sanctuaries scattered across Athens. By bringing these sacred stones together, they weren't just putting up a building. The Hagia Sophia stands as a magnificent, indestructible patchwork of history's greatest empires, fusing ancient ruins with genius engineering to create a monument that would outlive them all. It is literally built on the shoulders of the ancient world.
But as we know, walls, waters, and stone domes simply aren't enough to hold the line forever. This brings us to Ring 5, the ultimate human weapon. Because a city cannot survive on stone alone, it demands flesh and blood, an invincible human shield. The final layer of the city's defense wasn't made of mortar or rare jasper. It was forged in something much darker, setting up a shocking reality that would shape the region for centuries to come. Which leaves us with a massive, chilling question. To protect this impenetrable city, what mysterious military force took young children from their homes, only to rigorously forge them into the world's ultimate, unbending fighting machines? We're going to dive deep into that terrifying human war machine in our next explainer, and trust me, you absolutely do not want to miss it.
Picture this. A secretive, ancient military strategy, so audacious and, frankly, chilling that it fundamentally altered the course of empires. We're talking about a highly calculated process designed to gather children and meticulously mold them into the most perfect, lethal, and unyielding fighting machine the ancient world had ever seen. Welcome to Part 4 of our Explainer series. Today, we're unlocking the vaults of history to examine a force built purely to conquer, a force that eventually became a literal nightmare for its own creators.
Okay, let's dive into this. Our grand stage is Constantinople, the glittering jewel and impregnable center of the Ottoman Empire. For centuries, this incredible city witnessed the rise and fall of countless armies. But the story we're focusing on today, it isn't about your traditional army raised from the countryside. No, it's about a dramatic, high-stakes historical experiment that unfolded right here in the shadow of these great domes and minarets.
And it really begs this fascinating and honestly terrifying question. What happens when an empire builds a weapon so powerful, it actually threatens its own creators? Think of it like a military Frankenstein's monster. The state poured absolutely all its resources into engineering a flawless, unstoppable striking force. But when you create an entity designed purely for power and violence, what happens when that unquestioning obedience begins to crack?
Well, we're going to map out this wild, chronological journey to see exactly how this ultimate weapon evolved. It all kicks off in 1362 with their systematic founding by Sultan Murad I, sweeps through a terrifying golden age in the 1400s and 1500s, where they hit their absolute apex of power. And then it ends in a sudden, explosive, and incredibly bloody climax in June 1826. Section 1. Forging the Janissary Army. So, back in the 14th century, the empire was expanding rapidly, and Sultan Murad I realized he needed a completely new kind of guard. He came up with the Janissaries, which literally translates to new soldiers. In 1362, the empire kicked off this radical, unprecedented strategy. They weren't just drafting ordinary citizens for a summer campaign. These guys were a uniquely molded elite infantry unit designed from the ground up for one singular, uncompromising purpose: absolute, unquestioning obedience to the throne. And this brilliantly illustrates just how calculated and relentless that creation process was. Step 1. The state gathered 1/5 of captive youths, taking them from their origins at a very young age. Step 2. They plunged them into strict religious and military training, teaching them the ultimate arts of discipline and war. And Step 3. Absolute devotion. They were entirely isolated from the outside world. I mean, they were raised from childhood to be fiercely disciplined warriors with literally no other family but their regiment.
But it wasn't just physical. The spiritual foundation was just as intense. Listen to this legendary blessing given to the unit by the revered holy man Haji Bektash. Make their swords sharp and crown them with victory forever. He blessed them, gave them their name, and instilled this deep religious fervor. To these young men, this wasn't just a military job. It was a sacred, lifelong calling.
Section 2. Rise of an Invincible Force. Man, once these meticulously forged soldiers actually hit the battlefield, their growth was just staggering. They fought with a zeal and a tactical brilliance that quickly earned them a fearsome, practically unstoppable reputation across entire continents. They started out as a tight-knit infantry of just 6,000 men, but as their military successes multiplied and they became the indispensable core of the state's power, they doubled in size, swelling to a peak of 12,000 heavily armed, fiercely competitive combatants.
And with that kind of immense power came tremendous rewards. Their unmatched bravery earned them an elite, almost untouchable status. They became the exclusive personal guards to the Sultan. They were showered with the highest honors, feared and deeply respected across the entire empire. Their unparalleled battlefield discipline made them the most pampered, yet undeniably lethal, unit in the state. They were, for sure, the ultimate fighting machine of their era.
Section 3. The Rebellion Begins. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast it shows. Because as history constantly reminds us, unchecked power rarely stays pure. The early Janissaries, disciplined, flawlessly loyal, invincible. Yet over the centuries, they evolved into something incredibly dangerous. Their immense power and elite status totally corrupted their original purpose. They became rebellious, deeply corrupt kingmakers. They figured out that if they possessed the power to protect the throne, they also possessed the raw military might to overthrow it. They essentially morphed into a new Praetorian Guard. Just like those notorious guards of ancient Rome, they started using their military might to violently dictate state politics. Whenever they felt even slightly disrespected, they'd barricade themselves inside the capital city, demand extravagant privileges, and plunge the whole government into absolute chaos. The supposed protectors became the absolute supreme threat to the state itself. Section 4. The Auspicious Incident. So the tension becomes completely unsustainable. It's a terrifying, high-stakes, kill-or-be-killed scenario right at the heart of the empire. And finally, the hammer falls. June 1826, the annihilation. Sultan Mahmud II, who had been secretly preparing his own loyal artillery and entirely new troops, ordered the absolute, devastating destruction of the Janissary order. There was no room for negotiation, no path for retreat. This was the sudden, brutal end. The details of this explosive climax are incredibly grim. The Janissaries were strategically trapped in the At-Maidana Square in the capital. They were fired upon by heavy artillery and massacred without mercy. And the purge didn't stop there. New military laws were instantly enacted, and surviving members were ruthlessly hunted down across the empire's furthest borders. In a matter of days, a once invincible fighting machine and its centuries-old legacy was violently erased from existence. Let's move to Section 5 and see how this builds into the bigger picture: what changed the world. You see, the fall of the Janissaries wasn't just about internal palace politics. It was also about a rapidly changing world where ancient infantry tactics just weren't cutting it anymore. While empires were wrestling with their own elite guards, entirely different forces were quietly reshaping the globe. Consider the compass, discovered for European use around 1302. This single, unassuming little tool did more to expand empires than any army of foot soldiers ever could. It conquered untamed oceans, bridged impossible distances, and suddenly connected distant nations, bringing unprecedented wealth to whoever could navigate this new global theater. And then there was gunpowder.
Perfected and widespread in warfare by the 1330s, this explosive force fueled devastating cannons. It was the ultimate equalizer. Suddenly, ancient swords, traditional shields, and the most impregnable city walls were rendered completely and utterly obsolete. The fundamental rules of military power had shifted forever. So, it leaves us with this huge question. How did simple inventions like the compass and gunpowder shift the fate of global empires forever? How did emerging technology outpace the ultimate fighting machines of the ancient world? Well, that is exactly what we are going to uncover next. I can't wait to see you for our fifth and final explainer, where we'll explore the explosive dawn of the modern era.
Welcome back, everyone. This is the fifth and final explainer in our series. And today, we're basically going to pry open a historical time capsule. We are going to look at exactly how ancient human ingenuity laid the absolute groundwork for the modern world we live in right now. You know, throughout this series, we've explored some pretty incredible events and eras, but today, we're zeroing in on the actual tools that built our current reality. I think we often take the modern conveniences around us totally for granted. We kind of just assume they materialized out of thin air, or maybe that they belong exclusively to recent generations. But honestly, the truth is that the blueprint of our modern existence was drafted centuries and sometimes millennia ago. Today, we're looking at what is essentially a grand relay race of knowledge, a race passed across continents and empires, culminating in the world we know today. Let's dive in.
So picture this for a second. Imagine discovering a locked, ancient chest buried deep in the earth. You pry it open, and inside, you don't find gold or silver, but rather the raw seeds of our modern existence. Just 4 fundamental ideas passed like a baton across civilizations, carefully refined by entirely different cultures over hundreds of years. What if I told you that without these specific, isolated sparks of ancient genius, global trade, modern nations, and literally even the screen you're looking at right now just wouldn't exist? It's a pretty wild thought, right? Well, today we are unlocking that chest. We're going to trace the explosive, illuminating, and world-shrinking journeys of these 4 incredible inventions.
All right, Section 1, Navigating the Unknown. Okay, so before this first invention, sailors were absolutely chained to coastlines. They were terrified of the vast, featureless oceans, and for good reason. But then, a brilliant cross-cultural evolution of technology changed absolutely everything. I'm talking about the magnetic compass. Step 1 of this relay race. The ancient Chinese discovered the magnetic properties of lodestone way before anyone else, utilizing it for land and early maritime navigation. Then, they hand off the baton. Step 2. Arab mariners adopt this total game-changer by the 9th century. They used it to safely cross the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf, completely mastering the treacherous waters of the East. And then, Step 3, it finally reaches the hands of Europeans and Crusaders by the 12th century. This is just an incredible relay race of knowledge. It wasn't just one lone genius in a vacuum. It was a massive, collaborative human effort that spanned thousands of miles and hundreds of years.
And all of this shared cross-cultural knowledge finally clicks into its definitive form in the year 1302. After centuries of being passed from east to west, an inventor in the maritime hub of Naples, Italy, finally perfected the maritime compass. He took all that inherited ancient knowledge and refined it into the super reliable, practical instrument that would soon guide ships across totally uncharted oceans. This is what connected the continents and really kicked off the age of global trade. Without that culmination in 1302, the map of the world as we know it remains a complete mystery.
Moving right along to Section 2, the Spark of Power. So we transition now from physical exploration to physical power. We're looking at an invention that entirely reshaped the mechanics of human conflict and literally redrew the borders of empires. Just imagine the sharp, acrid smell of sulfur cutting through the air. Gunpowder. It originated in China right around the dawn of the Christian era. And for centuries, it was this closely guarded secret, a mysterious powder that could conjure fire and noise. But you know, secrets of that magnitude never stay hidden forever. By the mid-7th century, Arab forces were harnessing its terrifying potential, utilizing it as an incendiary weapon during the siege of Mecca in 690 AD. Slowly but inexorably, this volatile mixture made its way westward, finally hitting Europe by the year 1257 AD. And man, the world was about to become a much louder and much more dangerous place.
Which brings us to a massively crucial point in time, the year 1270. This is the heavy historical moment when the English chemist and monk Roger Bacon formally documented the exact formula for gunpowder in the West.
He wrote down the precise mixture, effectively dragging this terrifying, world-altering chemistry out of the shadows and placing it directly into the hands of European tacticians. From this exact moment onward, the countdown to modern warfare was ticking.
Now, there is a stark, fascinating contrast in how this technology was actually deployed over time. On the left side here, we see the deep roots of artillery. Chinese forces had known about the properties of gunpowder and early projectile devices for essentially 2 millennia, 2,000 years. But look over at the right side. Once Europe adapted this technology around 1325, things escalated with terrifying speed. By 1346, the English King Edward III was deploying utterly devastating cannons against the French at the Battle of Crécy. So we see ancient Chinese innovations evolving rapidly into the heavy battlefield artillery that would eventually shatter castle walls and redefine European warfare forever. Almost overnight, the sword and the shield were suddenly obsolete.
Let's slow it down a bit. For Section 3, Preserving Human History.
We've seen how humanity learned to navigate the oceans and conquer the battlefield. But honestly, none of that matters if the knowledge itself is lost, right? Geographically, information storage had to take a massive leap to conquer time itself. Now, in antiquity, the ancient Egyptians gave us papyrus, which was brilliant, for sure, but it was incredibly fragile and limited. But then, a huge breakthrough happens. In 651 AD, in the city of Samarkand, the technique of producing high-quality paper from cotton is adopted from the Chinese. And this was a total revolution. It was durable, it was easily writable, and it could hold the fragile spark of human intellect securely. Arab traders and scholars grabbed hold of this incredible technology, and by 1100 AD, they had set up thriving paper mills all the way over in Spain. The canvas of human history had finally fully been laid out across the continents.
And this preservation of knowledge, it ultimately builds into an absolute explosion of mass communication. Because, look, having paper is great, but copying books by hand took years. Over on the left, we have the ancient Chinese method. They brilliantly figured out how to carve entire pages into wooden blocks to print. And it worked, but it was incredibly slow and rigid. I mean, if you made a single typo, you had to literally carve the whole block all over again. Then, on the right, we have Johannes Gutenberg's massive, world-altering leap in the 15th century. He didn't just invent printing out of nowhere. He built upon it by using movable metal-type cast-in molds. This was a game-changer. You could rearrange the letters, print a page, and then take those exact same letters to print a completely different page tomorrow.
1450. I really want the absolute weight of this number to sink in, almost like the heavy, rhythmic clack of a metal printing press. 1450 is the year Gutenberg printed the Latin Bible in Mainz, Germany. This was the exact moment that intellectual immortality was unlocked for the masses. Ideas, science, history, rebellion, it could all now be replicated thousands of times over, spreading faster than any army could ever march. It is, without a doubt, one of the most pivotal years in the entire history of the human race.
And finally, Section 4, Connecting Past to Present.
As we bring this 5-part explainer series to a close, I think it's so vital to just take a step back and look at the magnificent tapestry we've unraveled here. Every map you use on your phone, every bound book sitting on your shelf, every modern structure of power, literally none of it is entirely new. The breathtaking architectural triumphs of the past, like the magnificent domes of ancient Constantinople, stand as a permanent testament to our shared human progress. I really want you to take this away. Our modern reality is entirely built on this global relay race of ancient brilliance. The Chinese, the Arabs, the Europeans, no single civilization did this alone. They shared, they borrowed, they adapted, and they perfected. The compass, gunpowder, paper, the printing press, they are quite literally the invisible foundations of the room you are sitting in right now.
And so that brings us to the ultimate question. The past preserved us, right? Their sheer ingenuity survived centuries of war, plague, and time just to give us the modern world. So, I leave you with this thought to chew on. What will we preserve for the future? When humanity inevitably opens the time capsule 1,000 years from now, which of our modern ideas will they look back on as the seed of their existence? Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey through this explainer series. Keep learning, keep questioning everything, and I'll see you next time.